Hey guys, today we're going to talk about which equipment you should skip over and which equipment you should focus on when you are in your earlier, stages of the game, and then kind of mid-game and then late game, which is where I am at now. So, you unlock most of these things from the progress path, but not all of them. In terms of mechs, the primary mechs that you're going to probably end up using would be Killshot and Panther. Now, a lot of people do max out those two mechs first, and they focus on those two mechs and only have their other mechs at like rank 4, rank 5. And they do this because bots are relatively weak. A lot of people say that they're strong, but they're really not. Once you get the hang of like how they move, how they work, you can figure them out pretty easily. And just having one or two maxed out mechs in your hangar can almost always get you through to the end of the battle. Very rarely do you even need to use multiple mechs if you have one of these maxed out against only bots. Against real players is when you're going to have some other problems, but in general, you're going to have a much better time if you just focus on upgrading your Killshot and your Panther first, and then getting weapons on both of those. Usually railgun on the Panther, and disc launcher or mortars on the Killshot. Your other mech priorities are going to be Zephyr. That comes a bit later. You could do Ares if you wanted to, but Guardian is another good one to get. In terms of early game mechs, you are given Arachnos through a derby event, so you technically don't have to pay anything for it, and that's a great thing because it's honestly a great mech to get once you get it. At the stage that you are in the game, when you unlock, when you are able to use Arachnos, 16 energy is a lot more than you have available for just about anything. And Arachnos makes a great placeholder until you get Guardian. I would not recommend that you upgrade Arachnos at all, though. It's not usable basically in mid or late game. It's really bad later, but it's really good when you get it, just because of the amount of energy that it has. Now, for Guardian, most people put on double Mortar 8s when they get it, just because Mortar Guardian, it works pretty well. And in terms of mortars, I will get to that in a minute. Now, obviously, your goal would be to get as many of the mechs that you want to get as possible, and I'm not going to tell you what you're going to necessarily need to get because this is up to you. Stalker is definitely one of the top meta mechs at the moment, though, so if there is an event and you do happen to get that, that is a great replacement for something like Ares at this point. In terms of Paragon, I would not bother upgrading that. Same with Lancer. Shadow requires a very specific playstyle, and that is something that I really enjoy using, and it can be really, really good in the right hands. But it's not for everybody, so I don't necessarily consider it, top 5, or it's in like top 7 or 8, something like that. Tengu's pretty good, but again, it's another event mech. Juggernaut, most people don't use Juggernaut. They usually replace it with Ares if they end up getting a tank. In terms of Brickhouse, you don't want to buy it. It costs like 1,000,000 credits, and that's a lot more than it's honestly worth. By the time you unlock it, it's already relatively obsolete. If you were to get it like in the earlier stage of the game, or like the earlier stages of mid-game, then it could be okay. If you had like between 2,000 and 3,000 squad power. But I still wouldn't recommend buying it because of just the cost benefit of it. It costs more than it's really going to get you in the long run. You're going to end up replacing it pretty early, because you'll realize that it's way too slow to really be able to keep up with the meta. It really doesn't have that much HP. It starts with a lot of HP, but at that same level, Juggernaut actually has more HP. MD and Cheetah, most people pass up. They don't even necessarily even buy them, and you can definitely go that route. Cheetah is something that most players don't use, but it can definitely be super useful depending on your play style. I would, if you're new to the game, I would watch video tutorials on specific mechs to see like how they work, how they operate. Check out like the stats or whatever in the shop, but also just check to see how the bots use them. If your enemy bots use a lot of them, and see how it works out. When I first started the game, I was getting destroyed by kill shots, and that made me just get angry at kill shots in general, and I decided not to use them. But on another note, I was also getting wrecked pretty often by bots with Guardians that had Rocket Mortar 8s on it. And that seemed like a pretty effective build, but then I thought to myself, okay, is there an even better build than Rocket Mortar? And I actually stumbled across Long Arm Guardian, which, in my opinion, is still one of the best long arm builds that you can get. It's not very fast, but long arm builds don't usually need to be fast. If you want to put like assault weapons on Panther or like missile weapons, then you can slap your long arms on a Guardian and you will likely not be disappointed. Okay, yeah. Once again, Zephyr is a great mech to get. It is one of the top 5. So once you unlock it, you're definitely gonna want to give it a go. If that's your thing. Weapons. So you're given the autocannons, obviously. Those are 2 of the least powerful weapons. I wouldn't bother upgrading them too much. Plasma cannons, if at all possible, I wouldn't even bother buying them, because they're just generally not good. The mechanics of them make them really just terrible, to be completely honest. Pulse cannons are okay. Not the 4s, but the 6s and the 8s can be decent early to mid-game. Carbines, you don't really unlock, and actually, they're like stupidly expensive, actually. And you're really not going to even get them until late game. But by late game, carbines already become a very unoptimal weapon to use. So I wouldn't even necessarily recommend buying carbines at all. And that's going to reflect in the pilots later on, but I'll get to that. In terms of RPGs, the RPG 6 can actually get you pretty far. From like early game to somewhat mid game, a 6 energy weapon remains pretty decent, and RPG 6 can get you through all of that. Missile Rack 6, though, you definitely want to skip over that. You unlock Missile Rack 8 first in the progress path, and that's a great weapon to get because that can be viable late game as well. It is, one of the fewer decent 8 energy weapons in late game. Missile Rack 6, not so much. By the time you get it, it's kind of weak. You may as well just be using Missile Rack 8. And if you have like a weird 14 energy build, then put on an RPG 6. Missile Rack 6 is not worth buying. The VRPG 8 is garbage, and Missile Rack 12 is great, but though neither of those are in the progress path yet. Thermal Lances, Thermal Lance 6 is okay. It's a good pair for like a beam build if you want to do that, but I wouldn't recommend beam builds at all. So you could skip over both of the stasis beams if you wanted to. And honestly, you might be better off for doing that in terms of like your resources. Shotguns. The 2s aren't worth much, but the 4s can get you pretty far, at least into mid-game. The shotgun 8s are amazing, but they're not in the progress path yet, which is unfortunate. But you can get those in the A-coin events later, if you if you can manage to. But it's a good replacement for the shotgun 4s if you decide to run shotguns. Close range builds are very popular these days because of the range implants that they get. Arc Torrent 6 is one of the few 6 energy weapons that's actually like usable late game, and definitely worth getting for anything. Arc Torrent 10, absolutely amazing. Almost as good as Arc Torrent 12, which is not in the progress path. Neither is Long Arm 12. Or Gauss Rifle 10, I don't think. Long Arm 8 and Long Arm 10. Now, Long Arm 8s are great to start with as sniper weapons. And like I said, even though a lot of people start with Panther, a lot of people put both their Long Arm 8s on like a Panther. A lot of people also put their Long Arm 8s on a Guardian. It's kind of like half and half at that point. Or you could just put it on Arachnos even, because that starts with 16 energy. Long Arm 10, since it is classified as a heavy weapon, it only comes as one weapon, and you do have to rank it up to rank 6 to duplicate it. But if you're like me and you really enjoy the long arms, then it's actually worth getting, in my opinion. The Long Arm 10 can get you pretty far. But if you do decide to stick with the Long Arm 10 and you get like a Long Arm 10, Long Arm 8 build or something like that, I would recommend don't upgrade your Long Arm 8s like I did here. I ranked it up once, I think, kind of not long after I got it. And then I leveled it up to 7, and then I didn't upgrade it after that. I focused literally everything into Long Arm 10. Rank 6, level 4, like, I'm not even kidding you. This is the weapon that I focused basically all of my resources on, because double Long Arm 10 Guardian was the one thing that I wanted to get more than just about anything in the game. Way back when, I kept my Guardian at 20 energy, and yeah. In general, when you're upgrading your mechs and weapons and you're like, okay, which do I upgrade, this mech or this weapon? In general, you want to prioritize your mechs over your weapons. And the reason is because when you rank up your mech, you will actually get more firepower from the extra energy. You will inadvertently get more firepower and more HP as opposed to just straight up more firepower. So, yeah, in that case. The railgun, obviously, very endgame weapon. Everybody's, it's basically the endgame weapon for long arms. People usually just use long arms as like a placeholder until they can manage to get railgun. Which is fair. It's a very good weapon. Javelin rack. I think they put Jav 8 in the progress path. So this Javelin Rack 6s and the Javelin Rack 8s are actually pretty good. And they are worth upgrading, but not too much. I think once you are... I think like early and mid-game they're really good. Once you get into late game is when they start to not be so good. Because what they really are is just kind of easy free damage. And once you get to a point where that's not necessarily going to win you battles, that's when you do have to ditch the Javelin Racks. You're not necessarily going to want to, but yeah, there comes a point where you're going to have to ditch the Javelin Racks because they really don't win you battles. But they are a great way to get you through early and mid-game. Disc Launcher 8 and 12 are both in the progress path, and they are both fantastic weapons. The 12 is arguably more used than the 16, so I wouldn't even worry too much about not having a Disc Launcher 16. But if you manage to get it from like the event or something, more power to you. A lot of people skip over the 8s because they want to get the 12s, and you know their end goal is getting 2 12s or getting 2 Disc Launcher 16s, and then they're only going to use one Disc Launcher build, so there's no reason to get the Disc Launcher 8. And that is entirely fair. I don't think that Disc Launcher 8 is a bad weapon. People will say, I'm not going to get the Disc 8 because it's not good late game. That's not true. It is good late game, but depending on what you want Disc Launchers for, you're not going to want to buy it because it is very expensive, and it's not worth getting if your end goal is going to be 12s or 16s. You could save a lot of resources by just getting the Disc 12, and then, spending those resources on duplicating that so that you can put 2 of those on like an attacker mech or something. In terms of the rocket mortars, the 8s you get pretty early, and I wouldn't really blame anyone for getting them, because again, you can throw them on a base level Guardian or Arachnos, and they work pretty well. The 10s I would not get. You want to skip over those and save for the 12s, because the 12s are the end goal rocket mortars anyway. Once you get the 12s, you don't upgrade the 8s anymore, because obviously, you might have enough resources, like maybe, I'm at like rank 5 level something, and on my 12s, and it's going to cost me a lot more. I could just upgrade my 8s to get a little bit more damage out of it. That's not necessarily what's important. You got to think long term, and in that case, I literally upgraded my rocket mortar 8 one time, and I never upgraded the 10. I didn't actually buy this weapon, but a weird bug ended up happening, and I got it for free. The mortar 12 you do want to upgrade, though, if you want to use mortars, and that's what I did here. In terms of pilots, I think 4,000 XP is when you unlock pilots, and you are given red for free. I wouldn't necessarily recommend upgrading or ranking her up very much, because assault weapons are generally not very used mid or late game. Like I said earlier, pulse cannons are okay, but most people use, if they're going to use a carbine mid or late game, the most effective ones would be, well, if they're going to use an assault weapon mid or late game, the most effective ones would be carbine. But those aren't worth getting. Like I said before, they're super expensive, and the damage that they deal is just, it's so much lower than something like a missile rack or something else that you could use, like a Disc 12 or something. It's not worth getting the carbines, really. Now, a lot of people do start off and they just buy several rare pilots, and I do recommend that is what you do. You start off with red. You should probably buy Samson as your missile pilot. Don't bother with Mako because beams are not great. Jester's a good one. Torchlight's fine. Crow is fine, and probably Spark. Now, after you get a rare pilot on all of your mechs, or just a pilot on all of your mechs, if you have enough A-coins, you could always, buy an epic one. Obviously, but I would recommend getting some pilot on all of your mechs as quickly as possible, because the buff that pilots give is actually huge. It's a lot more than people realize, especially when they're earlier in the game. They don't realize just how big of a difference pilots make, but they really do. They make almost all of the difference late game. In terms of pilots, you do want to switch out for better pilots, better, like, tier pilots, as quickly as possible. These epic pilots will give you an extra implant slot and more stats in terms of like extra HP and extra weapon damage, and also the innate skill is also even higher. The same thing with a legendary, but the only legendary that exists is major. That is for assault weapons, which is arguably not really worth buying. So, my recommendation would be to rank up rare pilots to rank 4 at most, because once you get to that, it costs you 1,500 pilot marks, which is starting to get into the slightly larger upgrade territory, and that's when you can start to focus on getting epic pilots, and then you can save up those pilot marks to rank up your epic, and you can get them up, I wouldn't necessarily say fast, but you can get them up. If you want, you could also spend some A coins to upgrade them a few times. It's really not that expensive. It's one of the cheapest things in the game to upgrade a pilot's level a few times, and it really can make a lot of difference. So depending on how much it costs, depending on how many A coins you have, you might consider also doing that. Implants. I will give a brief once-over of the type of implants that you want to not bother with. Everything else is kind of up to you, and it does depend on what you want to use and what kind of weapons you're using, or what kind of playstyle you have. But obviously, legendary implants, those are great. But then you get into this territory of like Juggernaut shield durability, MD heal speed, Redux caustic damage. You don't ever want to gear your pilots toward a specific mech. Like, I don't have any of these mech specific implants on anything except for this Tengu Sky Strike one. And the reason for that is because all of the pilots, as they are already geared towards specific weapon sets. So gearing them towards a specific weapon is going to be a lot easier, and you can change it to a different mech without losing the effectiveness of some of your implants. Like if I threw this Juggernaut shield durability on like my beam pilot or something, if I then decided I wanted to use beams on something else, or I wanted to use different weapons on Juggernaut, I would have to then take that implant off and put it onto something else, or replace it with a different implant, because I'm not using Juggernaut on it anymore. But if you were to only have stasis beam implants on your implant, or on your beam pilot, then you're fine. You can take off your pilot, you don't have to change anything. And you can just, set it aside, not worry about it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking off your implants that often. Like if you have a pilot and you have several implants on it that are leveled up a few times, and you're like, man, I want to level up this other implant on this other pilot, I can just take off a couple of these implants and get some scrap back for it so I can upgrade it. I wouldn't bother doing that, because then that gets into a territory of like, you can get some major implant part losses from that. So I would just save that and let your scrap come from the random implants that you get from the daily crate and whatnot. But yeah, in terms of that, there are only a few other implants that I would consider basically worthless. One of them is Pulse Cannon Range. It genuinely does basically nothing. I think Pulse Cannon has a max range of like 100 meters anyway. And the chances of you even attempting to shoot pulse cannons at ranges higher than that is almost zero, and the range implant doesn't improve your accuracy any either, so it doesn't make any difference. That's a worthless implant to use. These mech ability implants are good, and you can throw those on as opposed to like mech specific ones. Like I said about the Juggernaut shield durability one, that one wouldn't be a good one to use, but if I had like an ability cooldown one, that applies to every single mech. You do have to be a little bit more careful about the duration and damage ones, because those don't apply to every single mech. So I would only equip either of these onto a pilot if you absolutely know for sure that you want to keep that build on that specific mech. And since, in terms of like, since Arachnos is not something that you're going to keep for very long, I would also recommend that you just scrap the Arachnos implants when you get them, and any other like weapon or mech that you don't plan on getting. The arc torrent range and the shotgun range. I don't have a rare one, but I have a legendary one right here. These are absolutely fantastic because close range weapons, their main weakness is that they're close range and they don't have a lot of range to them. You get these implants and it will increase it by so much that it doesn't even feel like a close range weapon anymore. It's more like a mid range weapon, especially arc torrent. You can get arc torrent to go up to like 70 meters or something like that, which is absolutely crazy. I think that's about it in terms of implants, except for probably like rocket mortar range. That's not one that I would really bother with, although that really just depends on you. I think the only one that exists is the rare one, and it really doesn't do that much. It just makes it so you can fire mortars slightly closer to you than 45 meters, but chances are they can get even closer than that. So it's almost never going to actually save your life or do anything for you. So I wouldn't really bother with that one either. But yeah, in terms of implants, I think that's about all I have to say. Now, the last thing that I haven't covered yet would be Redox and Surge, two legendary mechs that I do have maxed out. And they're very late in the progress path, so you're probably thinking, wow, these are really good mechs. Same with Brickhouse. They're really not. Brickhouse looks enticing because it's got a lot of HP to start with, but that's about all it has, and it ends up getting passed up by Juggernaut. So Brickhouse isn't worth getting, same with Surge, same with Redox. If you are a free-to-play, or if you're looking for just like the best stuff in the game without worrying about wasting your resources on things that objectively aren't as good, Redox and Surge are both not worth getting because they cost a lot of A-coins. I think both of them cost A-coins. And yeah, they're not that useful. They're not that useful late game. They're both usable, and it does depend on your playstyle a little bit. I feel obliged to, say that, but in general, they're not as useful as other mechs that you could find, such as Panther and Killshot and Zephyr. So that about wraps up my general equipment guide. I don't think I was forgetting anything. If you think I was forgetting something, or if you think that I said something that was wrong even, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you have any other questions about what you should get in terms of equipment, I will do build guides later at some point. I do have a lot of recommendations for specific mechs having specific builds, but I wasn't going to get into that in this video, but I will get into that at some point. But yeah, hope you all learned something, and if not, I hope you at least enjoyed the video, and if you did, please do leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. I will see you all next time.